Hey, I'm Claudia Zenkert, and I will be doing the masterclass on greening the production. Basically, what's going on in the industry, what tools do we have, and why does every one of us need to care about this and need to be proactive in this area? So I've split my masterclass into several points. So first, I'm going to give you the sad kind of status quo of the situation of the world that we're in, and the situation of our industry will follow suit. Then I will give you a few kind of examples of a toolkit of what can we do, and I will have some positive and also some negative examples of what has been done. And then I'll conclude with some takeaways for all of you. So let's start. Since when do you think do we as humans know about the dangers of climate change? Well, it's not interactive, so you can't really answer me right now, but I was surprised when I found out, because the result is we've known for over a century. Right in the beginning of the 20th century, there were several publications about the threats of heightened levels of CO2 emissions. So the problem has been known for over a century. That hasn't kept us from telling an absolute story of abundance in our industry. Everything is glamour, everything was posh and wild and fast, and we didn't really care about carbon dioxide emissions or how we portray it in our industry for the longest time ever. And there have been quite a few people that say, well, this is normal. We've had carbon dioxide fluctuations in the emissions ever. And as you can see here in this graph, that is true. For millennia, there have been fluctuations in carbon dioxide emissions, but we can also see that since the 1950s, we have surpassed a critical level of carbon dioxide emissions that has never been happening before, and we can see no stop to this right now. As a matter of fact, the carbon dioxide emissions on a global level are still rising, which is super, super concerning. And this means that our politicians and all the scientists of the world have said that we cannot surpass a certain level of temperature, global temperature rise to our planet in order to keep our ecosystems and habitats alive and our basically living standards and livelihoods as they are. And this goal was the 1.5 degrees Celsius cap off that we have to maintain as a global population. Well, how is that going for us? Well, as you can see in the climate action tracker right now, we are already, or at least in 2021, we were already at 1.2 degrees Celsius temperature rise on a global scale. And if we're not changing anything in our behavior or in our measures towards protecting the environment and protecting our planet and drastically reducing our carbon dioxide emissions, we are more likely going to head for a 2.7 degrees Celsius increase in the average global temperature by the turn of this century, the 21st century. So that's not good news, right? So what would that mean for the planet? I found this amazing map where you can see and this is a bit more exaggerated. This, for example, is a 4 degrees Celsius warmer planet situation than we have right now. And as you can see, the only thing that is probably really interesting to see at this is that the habitable areas that we know are basically being pushed more and more towards the pole areas, which means that a lot of people will be climate refugees, and there will be no habitable area in the middle of the planet, is basically where we are living right now. That's not good news. And we can already see those ripple effects happening, because it is already happening. We have the bushfires in Australia, the great fires in France and in the Mediterranean. We have the flooding in New York, Japan, or even in Germany that we had almost 2 years ago by now. So 2020 alone saw 50.5 million people displaced due to conflicts and natural disasters. This is a huge number, and it is affecting people in 31 countries that are not sufficiently resilient to withstand the ecological threats that this situation will continue to pose. And the situation has become so drastic that as of 2020, water joined gold, oil, and other commodities traded on Wall Street as a key resource for our planet. And this carbon emission, carbon dioxide emission and temperature rise is, of course, linked in a really, really big kind of connectivity around the globe. So we do know that biodiversity has been affected all over the planet. The species are dying. It's declining faster now than at any point in human history. And actually, since the 1970s, there has been an average of 60% decline in global populations of each mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. At this point, 25% of all animal and plant species are threatened with extinction. And this is now the status quo of this planet. So we do know and we do understand that biodiversity is essential for human life, for air, for food, for water, but also for health, medicines, fuel, materials, and livelihood. Without a healthy planet and without the biodiversity and the existing ecological niches and habitats that we have, we cannot exist. Healthy ecosystems can store carbon and help us protect from the impacts of climate change and the climate crisis. So we have to protect our ecosystems. And we do know that all of this is really linked, and we will not be able to achieve a net zero climate targets without considering the effects on the different habitats, on the ecological niches, but also not on biodiversity. So let's look at how does that reflect on us? Knowing all of this, knowing the status quo of this, how has that been reflecting on us as humans? Well, as you can see here in this little graph, this is basically the UK, but it gives you a little bit of an impression of what's going on. We do live in an age of basically, we call it climate fatalism. That means we do have, there are optimists, there are strong optimists that believe that we can pull it around and we can change our behavior so drastically that everything will be fine. We do have a few, we do have 41% of soft optimists. That means we really, really have to change something, but we're not really sure how we are getting there. And then we have the defeatists, the fatalists, the deniers, and the people that are just that just don't know enough about this. So we need to make sure that we can tackle this and that we can turn all those deniers and defeatists and fatalists into optimists and really inspire a change in behavior. So basically, we know at this point in our history of humanity, we know what we have to do. Basically, we have to halve our carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. And then we have to halve them again by 2040. And literally, we have to be at net zero by 2050. So it is all hands on deck, and this saying that the film and TV industry is not exempt. So we have to change. But in order to change, we need to figure out what's going on in our industry. So I want to say, I want to believe in an optimistic, transformative TV industry at a time of climate and environmental crisis. An industry that it reduces environmental impacts in production and inspires the industry to realize the creative opportunity that comes with it, because we do have power within the TV and production industry. We do have a big implementation or a big influence on the environmental impact. So TV alone spends an average of 5.7 tons of carbon per hour of TV program. And film spends an average of 2.84 tons of carbon per tentpole production. Tentpole production are these beacon productions that you see, like The Witcher or the Blue Planet series, or the flagship productions of the broadcasters and clients and streamers. And the TV industry does have a big economic influence. We are spending over $2 billion on content globally every year. That means that the TV industry, has a huge purchase power to shift supply chain and infrastructure for the better. We just have to make use of it. And undeniably, we do have a big cultural influence in the TV and film industry. Over 5 billion people are watching and streaming TV on this planet. we can reach over 5 billion people in our sector. And our sector has already formed in raising issues and educating audiences. So whether it is past examples where we did good or how we actually are promoting issues, we can make a change and we have to stand up to this responsibility. So let's take a look at the fact, how have we in the TV industry been doing so far? Well, again, this is a short excerpt from the UK, but let's just say dogs in 2020, the word dog has been used over 286,000 times on telly, and 133,000 times the word cake has been said. How does that look for biodiversity? You can see biodiversity in this scheme when you look very, very closely. Biodiversity has actually been mentioned 1,688 times throughout the year 2020, and climate change has only been mentioned 12,715 times. So even though we have to acknowledge that this has been the year where the pandemic hit, and of course there were other issues like vaccination and the NHS, the health system, but let's just say this is kind of symptomatic of what's going on in our global TV industry. And I dare say from a mentioning of 1,688, we can do better. So we can do better. That's a good word, because broadcasters already are doing better compared to 2020 and before. So last year at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, there actually was a so-called, what they called the Climate Content Pledge, which means that 12 key broadcasters from around the world committed to more climate storytelling across all genres. And this means that they acknowledge and use the power of TV in spreading the message of climate change to mass audiences. They also pledge to share industry learnings and consider approaches for future challenges. They pledge to showcase the collaborative work of the broadcasters over the past decade in reducing their environmental impact and thereby inspire to move forward in a positive way. They pledge to underline the broadcasters' editorial and commercial sustainability initiatives, and they pledge to inspire, engage, and inform industry audiences. So basically, broadcasters around the world have now seen that we can do better, and we have to do better, and they're now committing to a kind of global climate pledge where they say, okay, and now we will ripple effect force basically everybody who wants to work with us to do better in what they're doing. So where are we in the industry? So the TV industry impact, and this again is just not as exemplaric because of course we've had the pandemic years. So basically even though you can see a big decrease in the industry impact in 2020 and 2021, that probably isn't a realistic picture, but it's due to the decrease in all activities that we had due to the pandemic. But as you can see here in this 4-year overview, that 1 hour of TV is still spending 5.7 tons of carbon dioxide emissions on average. And you can see here in the different colors of the columns that the biggest chunk of carbon dioxide emissions that we have in the TV production industry is travel. So travel and transportation, it's accommodation, and then we do have actually smaller bits and pieces of CO2 emissions that fall to filming, post-production, and non-filming activities, so basically office and creative activities. So that is known. So let's look at this, and don't be alarmed by this graphic, it's very detailed, but just to give you an example of where, like, how is this distributed within the TV industry. So as you can see here, we have the biggest genres, and surprising to me actually was the fact that drama productions are the biggest polluters. I would have bet on show, but show, as you can see, is actually a very tiny slither of carbon dioxide emissions. But drama productions are the biggest polluters in our industry. The same goes for international factual, as you can see in this line, international factual. And that is due to all the travel, the transportation, bringing protagonists and crew to locations, getting them to stay there, making sure of accommodation, and so on and so forth. And then, and only then, the other carbon dioxide polluters come in, which is the production offices and so on, and the post-production in this matter. So what can we do? What in our TV industry, what do we have as a toolkit in order to change our behavior and in order to drive positive change? Well, in our industry, as I mentioned, and as you've seen in the graphics, the biggest polluters and the biggest carbon dioxide emission comes from travel and transportation. So transport and travel is one of the biggest issues that we can tackle. This and all of our toolkit, and I can only employ this to each and everyone out there, has to start with long before we actually take a camera into our hands, but it has to start from the very moment that we are thinking about going into the production, pre-production, production, and post-production. So think about it as early as possible when you start your projects. It does implement and it does concern creative teams, crew, protagonists, locations, but also data transfer, recording, and approval periods in post-production. So it is a really holistic approach, and travel and transport can be applied to all these areas of the production. And of course, it means that we have to shift from traditional modes of transportation to maybe electric vehicles, to public transportation, etc. pp. And one big chunk that still hasn't been exploited as much as I would wish for, and that means that we should be trying to use as much local crews and local equipment as possible. That isn't possible in all genres. So for example, in wildlife and nature filming, this is an absolute tricky bit, because the remote locations where we're at, there most of the time there is no crew that is schooled and trained in the areas of expertise that we need, and there is no equipment hubs that we can use. So if you go to remote areas in Mongolia and so on, you might not have that option. But again, we should, and each and every one of us should aim for 100%. And if we achieve less, then that's still good, because we're still changing the approach in the industry. Another area that we can change in is in the realm of spaces and offices. So again, this is a conversation that has to start as early as you think of the project. The moment you think about partnerships, the moment that you set up your production, we can think about how can we make this more energy efficient, how can we lower our carbon dioxide footprint. And this means talk to your energy providers. Consider the option of adding renewable energy sources like plug-and-play solar systems, or use reusable materials. Try to drive no print policies within the offices. We know that broadcasters really rely on their paper contracts, but all of this can be implemented and changed and driven from within the production offices as well. So live and lead by examples. And the same goes for catering. Try to implement as much vegan and vegetarian as you can. Most of your employers and partners will not mind at all. Another big area where we can change is materials. And the materials basically go for areas like drama and factual, where there's a lot and high use of props, costumes, and set designs. So there are toolkits now, and I will give you some addresses later where you can have an overview and inspiration of these toolkits. But there is a lot of stuff that we can do. We can use, we can find platforms where we can recycle props and costumes and also set designs themselves. But there's also a big movement towards more environmentally friendly or less toxic building materials, as in paint and salvaged goods and so on and so forth, so that you really can have a big impact in your materials and set design compound within the production. So don't underestimate that. Another part where we can influence positively what we're doing within the industry is waste and disposal. Again, if you're on set, make sure that you use reusable materials on location, that you bring thermos, that you use glass bottles, that you use real cutlery. Avoid plastic on all costs. Tend to catering that provides vegan or vegetarian cuisine. And it is actually doable. And this again goes for bigger productions, drama productions, international factual productions, all these show productions that have a lot of people on a set at times. You can talk to your disposable and waste management companies and make sure that they recycle as much as possible, that they themselves maybe use offsetting, and that they simply treat and go about their business in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly way. So never be afraid to ask and inquire from your providers and from the companies that you work with. Another big and not to be underestimated tool in our toolkit actually is what we call planet placement. Planet placement again goes through kind of the areas of the production that both translate on screen that you see on telly, but also what is lived behind the scenes and off screen, so to speak. So we can make sure in the production that we show new technologies, that we, in the background, in all the factual programs, you can see solar panels, and you can see, heat pumps, or that, the people on camera, that your protagonists are no longer arriving by, the big Jeeps and the big Humvees, but they're arriving now in electric cars. They're using public transportation. You can see that they're cycling on camera. All of these actions that would inspire a responsible behaviors, both in the players behind the camera, but also in the audiences that watch the shows and the content later. And all of these things are editorial and storytelling choices that we can implement and that we can really tweak and become better and be better in our industry. So this again is a pledge to question yourself and become and grow in the instances that you work in. And then we have a final tool called carbon offsetting. Carbon offsetting basically means that you're compensating for the carbon dioxide emissions that are arising from the production activities, such as travel, energy use, disposal, by participating in schemes making equivalent reductions. Please know, and really let it sink in, these carbon offsetting measures are not a get out of jail free card. So this is always, or should be used as an additional measure to reduce the carbon dioxide footprint, and not to replace any of the other thoughts that you might want to put in there. And please be sure, because it's often done, carbon offsetting is often done by, planting trees or by carbon capture and storage technologies and supporting those initiatives. Please make sure that you know where you're offsetting to, and that it is not simple greenwashing, but it does fulfill a purpose and it does have an effect. So let's look at this toolkit a little bit more in detail. And again, please be inspired by it, and please, I can only tell and employ every one of us and of you, start thinking about it as soon as you have the idea and as soon as you enter development with your project, because it does transpire into all of the fields of production. So if we look at travel and transport, as a general kind of note, it is to say we should all aim to travel as little as possible, and if you have to, we should try and use as much public transportation as possible, which also means this is also including the processes that are what we call pre-production. So all the creative meetings, the script writing, and so on. We can make a change that we shift to online meetings whenever possible. And for example, to help the data transfer and again, all the energy consumption in the back, I would suggest, say hello, greet everyone, see how they're doing, and then turn off the camera after a few minutes and then continue your meeting without the camera. It does help the data transmission and the data storage a lot. Use sustainable accommodation whenever possible. Be as blunt and ask hotels and Airbnbs and all the other options that you're using for their green options. What are the hotels doing to reduce their CO2 footprint? How are they actively providing? Are they using green energy? It is our job, and we are actually no longer excused from making those requests and asking these accommodations. And this means for all things, travel, whether it is for creative meetings, for approval meetings, or for the accommodation that you need for your camera crew and your protagonists. Be aware, ask the questions, because you will see it might start as a bit of an endeavor in the beginning, but you will realize that you you establish a platform of hotels and venues that you can go to with a better conscience. And then once you have that platform and that pool of hotels, it becomes easier and easier as you go along with further productions. Shift to electric cars off and on screen. There's a great, it has been challenging in the past, and we've encountered even big cities like Austin in the US where we barely found any electric car provider. And again, there is a website from UFO Drive. It's just popping up. They're all across Europe. They're establishing more and more in the US because the big car rental companies, Sixt, Alamo, and so Eurocar, they haven't really been offering electric vehicles as an alternative. So we found this site. Feel free to use it, but at least have a think on it. It isn't always possible. Again, aim for 100%. If it is possible, be happy with it and promote this, because it should be promoted that we make that shift. Another big issue that actually will save you a lot on travel and transport is the fact of using local crews wherever possible. It is very tricky, and I'm not exempt, or C3 is not exempt from this either. To find crew is a very sensitive matter, because they need to live up to your standards. They need to live up to the client standards. So I can only suggest and promote that you communicate with other production companies, with your broadcasters, with your clients, to find these good local talents. Maybe a befriended company has been working with people in Kenya or Rwanda or wherever, Mongolia, where you have to go. So you don't have to bring your own crew to the locations and provide all that travel and create all that carbon dioxide emission, but you can use local crews. What we've done in the past, and I can only promote that as well, is that we, in the end, after our production, we provided our broadcasters with a kind of a crew list. What have they done? Where we're successful? Where are they at home? To be sharing with the following and other production companies that they work with, in the hopes that we create a pool, that we have reliable crew all across the planet that we can use, and we don't have to bring our own teams in wherever we go. In-country travel in general, when possible, should be done by public transportation. That's clear. We don't have to fly from Munich to Berlin. You can use the train. Same goes for other countries. Another issue, and that is mainly concerning kind of post-production and edit, try to make a conscious shift to buy couriers within cities and avoid overnight deliverables with your courier services. And again, actively ask for sustainable courier measures. What are they doing? Like even FedEx, they all have now these kind of greening implementations that they're doing, how they're changing their own system. Inquire about it and make use of it. It feels like a lot of work now, but honestly, it will save you money if nothing else. Again, as a total and as a kind of a headline, we should avoid business and first class travel whenever possible. And again, same as the local crews, try to get your equipment locally, so you don't have to, access baggage to all the locations, and you can save on carbon emissions there. The other big thing that we can have an impact in is waste disposal. And again, this is a general sentence to all things in this area. Think about it and include practices into the entire production or project. So that means, implement reusables in the office spaces. If you have employees that don't like cloth towels, at least provide a choice between cloth and paper towels, so that you can sensitize and inspire your employees within the companies to make more environmental conscious decisions. Avoid plastic bottles, shift to glass or even soda streams or whatever is possible nowadays, in order to simply not use plastic anymore within the offices. But again, all of this also counts for the production and on-location production as well. Avoid printing whenever possible. We all know that the one and the other institution still wants a real signature and needs the paper contract, but wherever possible, schedules and so on and so forth. We live in a time where we can basically reduce our printing easily by 80%, if not at all. Use responsible and sustainable waste disposable companies. again, inquire about their practices, learn how they're doing it and what your options are. And in general, just be aware that you recycle as much as possible and that you implement rechargeables during the production. So even your battery consumption, it doesn't have to be, you know, throwaway batteries. You can use your chargeables, make sure that you inventory them, and then it can be recycled and reused for further productions. And then let's come to the big planet placement that can, you know, again, transpire through all areas of the production, the editorial and the creative choices as well. And just to give you an example, there have been some really, really cool positive social examples in the TV industry in the past. So I don't know how old you are, probably way younger than me, but if you remember the 70s and the 80s, you know, in TV shows, you could never see anybody wearing a seatbelt. Then it became chic to wear the seatbelt, it became a must, and now everybody, it is really common that nobody is driving without a seatbelt. Same goes for smoking. Remember Mad Men and all the other projects that were out there where smoking was just really normal to do in all of the offices. That was banned, and now nobody is smoking anywhere. So we can see in these examples, and also with the designated driver that was promoted, I think, for the first time in the 90s in a sitcom, that, you know, these things really drive social change. So planet placement in our era is really quite important. And in addition to anything that I mentioned before, so if you look at, you know, showing solar panels, electric cars, and all these positive impactful measures on TV in your factual programming, there are actually some really cool creative, explicit approaches that have been done in the TV industry editorially. So, for example, one of the cool examples is in the 2016 remake of The Jungle Book. They actually implemented a pangolin as a character. There was no pangolin in the original Jungle Book, but they felt the need that it would be, because it's an endangered species, it barely gets any attention, it lacks the fur and glossy eyes, so it needed that attention. And you could really see a positive effect, and all the NGOs that are working in the space of pangolin conservation and illegal poaching, they could see a big surge of interest after this film was released, and there was this pangolin character which suddenly popped up on the audience conscience. The same way you can address climate and environmental issues editorially is, of course, implementing it in your storyline. Examples have been, there's many examples out there. For example, Black Mirror, that always draws these dystopian scenarios about what happens when all the bees are gone. But you can also look at things like WALL-E, what happens when we destroyed our planet, or the more recent Don't Look Up. So there are these examples where we can actively push for a behavioral or for a conscious change in the minds of our audiences. And those kind of editorial choices and planet placement choices, as explicit as they were in these examples, more and more things are trickling down into TV and other content streams as well. So for example, a funny example was in the big drama TV show Succession. There was this guy who donated all his money to Greenpeace to kind of, you know, not have his heirs fight over the money and give them anything. But the conscious choice of the production company and the script writers to donate it to Greenpeace actually led to a huge surge of donations to Greenpeace right after the show was aired. So it is really a matter of how can we bring environmental conscious things and environmental progression, how can we bring that, seed these thoughts into our audience's minds. This also, you know, transpires into all areas of soaps and factual entertainment. So now we have all these spin-offs of the British Bake Off, and all around the world there's more and more shows on vegan weeks or vegetarian bake-offs, or, you know, we have the Chef's Table that is completely vegetarian. So we can see this being more and more at the forefront of storytelling, and still in a very subtle way. And then Emmerdale and Little White Lies and all those other issues and other shows, soaps, so on, are dealing and are trickling in these small storytelling elements of either addressing a sustainable issue or addressing an environmental issue, just to nudge the audience in the right kind of way. But these are all very positive examples. I will not deny you the other side of the coin. So there is a very twisted, or there can be a very twisted perception. And two of those examples were actually The Beach, which was, I think, launched in 2000. And it was the film with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it promoted and it was shot in Maya Bay in Thailand. And after the film aired, actually there was such a rush and an increase in visitors to Maya Bay that it led to an unsustainable number of visitors and a significant damage to the coral reefs from both boats and also sunscreen that was used by all the people there. And one other sad kind of example, because the intention was certainly a different one, was Finding Nemo. Even though Finding Nemo actually promoted very positive messages, then you could still see that there was a high increase in the demand for clownfish as pets after the film was released, and that put a lot of pressure on the species itself. So we have to be very sensitive and very cautious about how we're trying to implement this sustainability thoughts or these environmentally friendly messaging into our storytelling. So if we want to ensure positive impact, I can only employ that we avoid filming at sites that may be impacted negatively by an increased visitors, and try not to disclose these locations at all so that people can simply not swarm the place. We should always avoid featuring biodiversity damaging products on screen, and we have to ensure the accuracy in portraying our species when we do portray them, and we have to avoid encouraging human interactions with them. So this is something that we always should be very conscious about. All right, so in general, what it all boils down to is that we need to change our behavior. This is a lot, and you will also get it in your worksheets. But basically, we have three measures. We can avoid, we can shift, and we can improve. And there is a framework, and this is a kind of something that if you want to take a screenshot or if you want to take one message home, I think this is a very good thing to share with your loved ones and your professional colleagues, because it basically says what can we avoid in our normal life, in our professional lives, where can we shift to, and how can we improve our standards. So this is a very important message to bring across, and it kind of gives you everything in a one look way. Let's talk a little bit more about carbon offsetting. So carbon offsetting has become a quite popular tool in the last few years throughout all industries. It's not just the TV and production industry, but it is more a general tool to make sure that our carbon dioxide emissions are, reduced by, providing an offsetting amount of money to any kind of reforestation measures or environmentally friendly measures. I said it before, and this should be always the credo, we cannot use it as a get out of jail free card. Carbon offsetting should never be the only measure that is taken in production or in the project approach at all. It should always be used as an additional, or I call it final measure, because this is what comes at the end of your production. So basically, how do you do carbon offsetting? You're using carbon footprint calculators. There is plenty of them all across the globe. Some are better, some are worse. All of them have flaws. So we use them basically as a kind of a blueprint and an impact calculator. And then you type in all your budget, and then you can in the end learn the final offsetting amount of your production, literally as, British pounds or euros or US dollars. And then once you know the amount that you need in order to offset your production, you can donate that amount to environmental NGOs, measures, reforestation initiatives, and so on and so forth. I can only implore you to make sure that you donate the offset amount to real and meaningful programs and actions. Otherwise, it quickly becomes greenwashing, which is quite negatively connotated today. So that means that you might want to use, nature education programs that you've been in touch with throughout your production. You want to donate to programs and NGOs that really work in the areas where you either shot or what you want to talk about content-wise anyway, and try to find local initiatives that you might have been in touch with during the production. Those are always good kind of things to be offsetting to. That is to say that carbon offsetting actually nowadays is becoming more and more the industry standard, and it will be required more and more by the clients themselves. As you could see in the climate content pledge that we've seen before from the 12 broadcasters, it is catching on, and it is a simple and effective measure of the clients and broadcasters to ensure that the productions are becoming greener as they go. So what can you take away from this? So take away from my conversation that it is a holistic process. You should never be shamed in not doing 100%, but you should always aim to do 100%. So, and the biggest takeaways that I can give you is when you start a project or a production, identify first, means understand your impact. Where are our biggest carbon dioxide emissions? What is the worst that we're doing right now? And what tools are available to us? So make sure that you identify right from the beginning and that you kind of get a good sight of the tools that are out there and get the ideas that what you can do within your production. The second thing is prioritize. Ensure you're taking action on the largest areas of your environmental impact. It is beautiful and nice and admirable if you talk to your post-production houses and your tax offices and make sure that they all use green energies, or your animation companies and so on, and that you as an office also use green energy and have that certified. But that is not going to be the biggest impact. The biggest impact in our TV and production industry is travel, accommodation. It is that kind of block that we have to tackle first, and where we can actually make the biggest impact, the biggest positive change. So be sure to prioritize and tackle the big issues. Collaborate. I can never emphasize this enough. Collaborate with others. Speak up and out. Ask all of your suppliers how can they help to reduce the carbon footprint of your production, of your project. Ask other colleagues what has been successful to you. Share information and make sure that you collaborate with others in this industry, because it is a giant feat that we're facing, and we can only tackle it best when we communicate with others and share our experiences and our successes, because that is exactly what it does. It is sharing these successes and inspiring change in others. Innovate. Explore innovations. Look at stuff that is out there. What has been going on in the space of generators? How are we using hydrogen generators now? Can we implement solar charging capacities or things into our production on location? Try to be innovative. Exciting stuff is happening all across the board and all over the world. Don't be afraid to try it out, and take it from experience. It might, from the beginning, looks like a lot of work, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually a lot of fun to do and to make these changes. And I know we're all acting under time pressure and money pressure, but if nothing else, I can only tell you that being environmentally conscious and trying to reduce our carbon dioxide footprint has actually saved us quite a bit of money in our last production, simply because we were able to change many things for the better. Again, I promised I'll provide you with a few links. Most people nowadays are using the Albert system. It's a UK system. You don't have to get an accreditation or a login for it. You could simply browse the toolkits there. They have toolkits for all areas of production. So even if you're like a big post-production facility or you're working in the creative space, go and check it out. Maybe there's something that you can use and that you can adapt to your own area of expertise and interest. Then there is the green film shooting. There's Eureka, the European Environmental Calculator. There's Ecopot, and there's many others out there. Again, communicate with others, draw from their experiences, what have been the most successful, and also implement your clients. Like look at your contracts, because more and more clients are now requesting maybe a certain calculator that you're using for your production. Best thing about this, talk about it with your friends, with your families, with your colleagues, and with your employees, and it just inspire, because many people could bring many fresh ideas to the table. So it is always good to communicate amongst each other and really make sure that we do drive the positive change that we want to see in the industry and in all other industries. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you could take a few cool things away from this. And yeah, we'll have a conversation about it. And I'll see you all soon, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for listening to the talk. Bye then.